base and keeping Biden voters unsatisfied and less likely to turn out for him. But again, in an election we expect to be incredibly close across the half dozen states that will decide it. It doesn't take a lot of those people who might have been leaning towards Trump to say, you know what, this whole thing is just too gross, I'm too exhausted by it, I don't want it, to swing an election.
Yeah, well, we're also going to be joined now by Jeremy Saland. He's a former assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's trial division. Also with me is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, former senior FBI official, and now an NBC News legal analyst. Chuck, I want to start with you. Give me an overview of what's been going on in the court today, especially when you look at both sides, but also, of course, the former president sitting there in court.
Right. Well, in the morning, primarily, Yamish, housekeeping matters and rulings by the judge on certain evidentiary issues. The government wanted to introduce what we call prior bad acts to show patterns of conduct or motive. And the judge, for instance, permitted the transcript of the Access Hollywood tape on that sort of rationale. Later in the day, after the lunch break, actually much later in the day, around 2 or 2:30, potential jurors started filing into the courtroom. They were going to complete questionnaires. Then they would be questioned on their answers. Those who felt they couldn't be impartial or fair would be excused. And from that initial pool of 100 or so potential jurors who were in the room, plus others waiting their turn, eventually the court would narrow it down to 12 jurors and 6 alternates who would sit in at trial as jurors in the case of People versus Donald Trump. Still a few days, maybe a couple of weeks off, but that process to pick the jury has begun.
And I'm told, Joshua, you're now with us, so I want to bring you into the fold here. Of course, she's been outside the Manhattan courthouse here. Talk about, of course, the history of this day, but really what has stuck out to you as you've been monitoring these procedures and all that we saw today.
Well, look, we saw just in the last couple of hours, after a lot of conversation between the lawyers for both sides and the judge, finally jurors brought into the courtroom. 96 were brought in. About more than half were dismissed after Judge Merchan asked if they were unable to be impartial in this case, to dismiss themselves, or if they were unable to serve for some other reason. So more than half dismissed. Then they went on with the actual process of voir dire, of asking the jurors questions from that 42-question survey, questions that include things like, have you ever read a Trump book? Have you been to a Trump rally? Are you a member of Antifa or the Proud Boys? Where do you get your news? So that is the process they're going through now. But it was a heated discussion between the lawyers and the judge today as